If you're a millennial, you've spent your entire life being explained to other people. You've been called lazy by people who bought houses on a summer job, too soft by the generation that raised you, and somehow too old and too cringe by the one right behind you. You've been blamed for killing the napkin industry, the doorbell, and the 9 to 5. For about 15 years now, having a take on millennials has been a national sport. But here's the thing almost nobody says out loud. The people who actually study this generation, instead of dunking on it, keep landing on a conclusion that flips the whole story. You might just be the most misunderstood group alive right now. Because underneath the avocado toast jokes and the participation trophy punchlines, something real happened to this generation. Something that has never happened to any other group of humans in quite this way, and probably never will again. Millennials grew up on one side of the single biggest shift in how people live, and then they were marched straight across it into a completely different world. They are the hinge, the last to remember the before, and the first to build the after. And once you see it through that lens, every single thing people mock them for starts to look less like a flaw and a lot more like the natural result of being handed an impossible position and quietly figuring it out anyway. So let me actually make the case. 5 things about the millennial mind that the jokes completely miss. Stay with me, because by the end the whole picture turns over. First, and this is the foundation for everything else, millennials are the only people who genuinely remember both worlds. Think about what a millennial childhood actually looked like. The phone was bolted to the kitchen wall with a cord you stretched around the corner for privacy. You knew your friends' numbers by heart. If you wanted to know something, you opened a book, or you asked an adult, or you simply never found out. You got lost with a paper map on your lap. Plans were made in advance and then honored, because there was no quick text to say you were running late. That was an entire way of being alive, and millennials lived it all the way through. And then, right as they reached adulthood, the entire ground shifted underneath them. The internet arrived, then smartphones, then social media, and they had to rebuild how they work, date, argue, shop, and stay close to people. From scratch, with no instruction manual, because nobody alive had ever done it before. No generation before them was handed both halves. The boomers got the analog world and watched the new one from a distance. Gen Z was simply born inside the screen and never knew anything else. Only millennials had to consciously walk from one world into the other, as adults, paying attention the whole way across. And that crossing left a mark. It quietly wired them for a kind of adaptability most people never have to build, because most people only ever have to learn one world. Second, the nostalgia. Millennials get mocked relentlessly for being obsessed with the 90s and the early 2000s. The reboots, the throwback playlists, the way they light up over a sound a dial-up modem made 25 years ago. And the easy read is that they're just stuck, refusing to grow up. But there's a real reason for it, and it isn't weakness. Nostalgia is the mind reaching for solid ground. When the world changes slowly, the place you came from stays roughly recognizable. You can go back to it. When the world changes this fast, the place you grew up basically stops existing. The shows are gone, the stores are gone, the whole texture of an ordinary day has been written over. So a millennial's childhood isn't just in the past, it's in a past that has been demolished and paved over. Of course they hold on to it harder. They're not clinging to cartoons. They're holding on to the last version of the world that felt slow, and certain, and theirs. That longing you've been teased for isn't immaturity. It's something closer to grief for a world that genuinely disappeared. And grief is only ever what you feel for things you loved. Third, millennials quietly rewrote what success even means, and they did it mostly because they had no choice. They were handed a very specific promise as kids. Work hard, go to college, get the job, buy the house, and you'll be fine. Then they walked out of school straight into a financial crisis, record student debt, rent that swallowed half their paycheck, and a housing market that had floated permanently out of reach. The old deal didn't just bend, it broke in their hands. And here's what they did, which I think is genuinely underrated. Instead of grinding themselves to dust, chasing a finish line that had quietly been moved, they changed what they were chasing. They started valuing time over title, freedom over the corner office, meaning over the size of the paycheck, a few real experiences over a garage full of stuff. The older generations called this entitled, a generation that didn't want to work. But that's not what it was. It was a generation that looked at a broken bargain and refused to keep paying into it. What looked from the outside like wanting less was actually a generation that stopped wanting the wrong things and started asking what a life is even for. Fourth, millennials are the ones who finally said the quiet part out loud. Every generation before them was handed exactly one instruction for dealing with pain. Tough it out, don't talk about it, keep it behind the door. And whatever it cost them, they mostly obeyed. Millennials broke that on purpose. They were the first to make therapy something you mention at dinner instead of hide. The first to use the word boundaries without embarrassment. The first to say out loud, I'm burned out, I'm not okay, I need help, without treating it as a character flaw. They took the whole hidden machinery of being a struggling human and dragged it into daylight. And yes, they got called fragile and oversensitive for it, usually by people who had spent 40 years white-knuckling their own untreated pain. But look at the result. So much of the emotional language younger people now use, freely, without a second thought, exists because millennials went first and took the hits for saying it. That isn't weakness, that's a generation that decided the silence wasn't worth what it was costing, and chose to break it anyway. And fifth, all of this makes them something no other generation can be right now. The translators. Picture a millennial at a family dinner. On one side, there's a parent who still doesn't quite trust the internet, who prints out emails and wants the phone number actually called. On the other side, there's a teenager who has never known a single waking second without a screen, who talks in a language of clips and sounds the parent finds baffling. And the millennial sits right in the middle and can genuinely speak to both. They remember the world the older one is homesick for, because they lived in it too. And they live fluently in the world the younger one was born into. They are the one person at that table who can explain each side to the other, who can hold both at once without the whole thing collapsing into noise. In a moment where the gap between generations feels wider than it has ever been, millennials are the bridge people walk across to reach each other. That is not a small thing. That is the most useful person in the room. So, line it all up. The adaptability, the nostalgia, the rewritten rules, the honesty, the translating. None of it is the behavior of a lost, lazy, entitled generation. It's the behavior of the people standing on the hinge of history, holding two worlds together with their bare hands. Millennials are the only ones alive who remember life before all of this, and then went ahead and built a life after it anyway, with no map, while being mocked the entire time for how they did it. Every generation gets handed a moment it didn't ask for. Theirs was one of the largest shifts in how human beings actually live, and they're the ones who walked across it carrying nearly everyone else on their backs. That was never a generation that got lost. That was a generation quietly doing the hardest job there is, holding the whole thing together while it changed shape underneath them. So the next time someone shrinks a whole generation down to a coffee order, you'll know exactly how much that misses. And if any of this landed a little too close, if it felt like I was describing you, or your slightly older sibling, or that one friend who still has their first iPod in a drawer somewhere, you already know who needs to see it. Send it to them. Subscribe, and we'll do the next generation too, because everyone is absolutely certain they have Gen Z figured out, and they are getting that one just as wrong. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourself.